That is a process that I'm not as familiar with. I think in the interim, it would be very effective to have closer scrutiny put on the California standard for product that is traded in California through local prosecution at the state level and district, because that is a law in California, as well as have the USJ look further into enforcement of the existing grade standards nationally prior to the completion of a new marketing order and standard that is created.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bauer, you talked about having notified state agencies and having gotten no response. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, and I'll talk specifically about California, but we've done it in other states as well. Once the standard was in place, anytime we've found an oil that was, we refer to it as grossly adulterated, so that there can be no doubt what it was. It's not something that just misses the standard, because then that's hard to. There could be some disagreement as to whether or not that's easy enough to take action against. But this is somebody putting something else in there.
But this was not California.
It wasn't California.
It wasn't California. I would like more information about that.
Yeah, and I can provide you with copies of letters that we've sent to the agency. There were at least 2 companies in California who, over the years, we have notified the State Attorney General about several times. In addition to FDA, we notified FDA on the national level and on the district level where we bought the product, and a few offices within FDA. But since California has a law in place now, it can take action, or any state seems to be able to take action much easier and much more efficiently than the federal government can, just because of size. So we really think, and speaking with Tom Mueller a while back, and he mentioned today, if you get 1 or 2 hits on something like that is so easy to prove, that message just goes nationwide, because people are going to realize, and people can't pick and choose where they're sending their product, which is why we are contacting other states too, trying to get more and more states to adopt standards of identity for olive oil, because then it gets hard. What can they ship here and there? So, but initially, and I'm sure any speaker that already spoke today would probably agree. It's again a low-hanging fruit that's out there that everybody knows who they are, and we've all probably told the state who they are. If we can get some action on that, well, that could go a long way.
I'm a bit curious, just a clarification of point. If I heard you correctly earlier, it was in defense of the NOAA's testing regimen has ensured that 99% of the oil does in fact meet the existing standard. And if I hear you correctly in your last sentence, was that you are only pursuing action on the most egregious offenders. That seems to me like a little bit of a conflict there in statement.
No, it's not true. My point was that the easiest action to take, the swiftest action, the least costly action for a state or a federal government to take, would be against the ones where it is so blatant and so easy to prove out there.
So to paraphrase that, the position of the NOAA is only to take action on the most egregious?
Absolutely not. We notify the government of every issue.
Every issue that's in conflict with what you mentioned earlier. So every issue?
It's not in conflict.
Every issue, just the most egregious ones?
Particularly the most egregious one. Just about if something is very close to standard, the government's not going to take action against it, and the cost to try to defend any action the government would take they're not going to want to take action against it. Yet we still notify them when there's an issue. When there's a blatant adulteration that takes place, we aggressively go after as many government agencies as possible. We try to sit down with them, particularly on a state level. We've done that, and try to get them to take action against these companies.
Mr. Bauer, do you have a website that publicizes all of these enforcement actions that you're initiating?
No, we don't do it publicly. We go through the government agencies because we believe it's their responsibility to take action against them.
I will agree with Mr. Engelhardt. The sum and substance of your testimony was that most things were fine.
Just a quick question.
Okay.
Go ahead. There was a group, the group that was here before, made the statement that they felt that almost 75% of this stuff was under quality. Are you refuting that number?
Yes, because that was based on these 2 tests that were not accepted; they were rejected by the International Organization of the world's olive oil experts. So they were rejected as being unreliable. So they were based on primarily on those two rejected tests and a taste test, which no matter how you break it down, and we've done our own, sent samples out to places and had them do taste analysis, and the panels come back with different replies because there's a degree of subjectivity whenever you do a taste test.
Could we have Mr. Miller address the sum and substance of the test issue?
Yeah. Starting with the chemistry, and in particular two tests that the International Olive Council has rejected, although I know they are certainly still in discussion about those at their panel of expert chemists. I come back to what I said. American Oil Chemists Society and the International Standards Organization are fine with those tests. They're very effective at detecting low-grade oils and very effective at detecting soft refined oils blended in with extra virgin, which is where a lot of the problem lies. In Australia, it was government that examined that issue, government that examined those data points. It was the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry chemists who examined all that methodology and looked at all that data point and was quite satisfied that that was fine to work. And I'll come back to what I said before on that and go a little further. In Germany, when that started to be applied by the government, and in my view, the Germans have the best fats and oils chemists in the world, initially it caused a fair bit of activity and publicity and controversy in the marketplace, but ultimately the major retailers saw fit to say, we're going to apply this as our internal standard, and they use this chemistry 3 or 4 times a year to monitor the progress of extra virgin olive oils in that marketplace and in neighbouring countries. So it's not good enough to say these have been rejected by the International Olive Council when you have ISO, American Oil Chemists Society, and major retailers adopting this in Germany and now in Australia. So it has been, in my view, rigorously examined and is certainly subject to discussion at the IOC, and you would do well to ask the American Oil Chemists Society about this too.
Right.
Getting to the tasting of olive oil, certainly it is to some degree subjective, but it is a scientific process. There are statistics involved, and sensory analysis is something that is conducted by whole departments at universities across this country of all types of foods. So I reject any thought that it doesn't have significant value. Certainly you can get to marginal points of difference, but obvious things like rancidity and significant rancidity, the vast majority of taste panels will get that. The good news is that this advanced chemistry follows along quite nicely beside the taste test, so a combination of the taste test, these particular tests altogether, in fact, can describe the life of olive oil well before it fails a test. The methodology actually is becoming really, really good, and I'm hopeful that one day soon the retail sector in particular will take this up as a way of monitoring what's in its shelves. That is the ultimate outcome. On behalf of its consumers, it feels obliged to do that, and that has certainly been the experience in Northern Europe and in fact in the UK increasingly.
My colleagues, do you have some questions or anything?
No, I'm going to have to leave, Madam Chairman, but I would like to make a comment on marketing orders. That Mr. Bauer, you don't think it's needed? Marketing orders in the olive industry?
As we said, I think it's excessive. I think there are better ways to handle that as opposed to adding those costs.
You know, marketing orders are always controversial, and we've got them in the grape industry. We've got them in the almond industry. The federal marketing order in the almond industry, as controversial as it was, has been a tremendous asset to that industry, and it has boomed globally because of it. So I think this is probably where we're heading. It's probably going to be a good thing for this industry, to come together and come together and within themselves and to do something to move this olive industry forward in the future. And as I got to go, I just wish you the best. Thanks, everybody, for coming, and appreciate everybody's input.
Thank you, Senator, for being here. Senator LaMalfa, did you wish to?
I'll follow on that. I'll follow on that point too. I think Mr. Bauer, you mentioned in your opinion on the marketing orders that because they would require extensive testing, like every lot. Was that the main beef you had with the concept, or is that a process that could be altered a little bit so it? Again, I think we're trying to find a float level here of what is comfortable for the growers on the amount of testing or the cost of that, or that sort of thing. We want everybody to be comfortable with it because we want the thing to work. Yeah. So why couldn't we find, just because it says marketing order doesn't mean test every bat, test every lot? Is that correct?
It's my understanding that the marketing order law requires every lot to be tested. And another problem.
We define lot in different ways then.
Well, you could, but basically, I know on the import side, it's at least every import shipment. Now, the importer could choose to divide that shipment into various lots. I've seen that done in some other products because then if one aspect is held up, you're not holding up an entire container or something like that. But another big issue there is, again, we don't accept these new tests yet. They show a lot of promise. And Paul Miller knows a lot more about the chemistry than I do. He's an expert in this area. I just need the rest of the world's experts to agree with him, and so far they haven't. Now they're looking at it again, and we've asked them. We've commended them for doing that, and we had asked them prior to when they started doing it to look at these tests, and they are. We did the same thing with the panel testing. That is not part of the IOC's ongoing testing when it does its program. We asked that it be included. And right now it's in a pilot phase where it is being included. Because, again, as I mentioned, to make an economic judgment on something that has a degree of subjectivity could be problematic. And going forward with a marketing order or any other type of requirement here in the United States, we were told in some states that absolutely we won't even consider putting anything in place that has that in there because it's going to cost us more money to try to defend that action than we're going to get in return for it and the benefit for it. So, our issues are, yes, as far as our understanding, it has to be every lot, and we don't agree yet with the testing.
And I guess that would be something we'd have to explore if the idea of a marketing order is something that's very important to make all this work. But and certainly with your input and getting everybody at the table, testing subjectivity, taste subjectivity is maybe a bit of an art, but if that's applicable to the wine industry as well, and they have a good workable solution, maybe we can emulate a lot of what wine does and some others to reach that. You don't want to be too subjective, but you want to be able to take some of the art aspects of this and have it in there if you can get a pretty good consensus. Does that seem agreeable?
Well, it does, and as Mr. Miller mentioned, the new test, if they do get recognized by the IOC, that correlate with what the taste panels find. So, and the IOC also has a fairly new test to detect some of the issues that these tests also do. So, with some sort of combination, it could very well work.
Can I just make another point about the chemistry that may clarify this for you? Mm-hmm. And I'll reiterate, probably don't need to, that these are ISO and AOCS accepted. But anyway, we'll put that to one side. The fact is that when an oil is freshly made and it's in really tip-top condition, to give you an example, one of the tests, it starts off with a level of 95 out of 100. After 2 years in Australia, it's still over the minimum accepted standard, a good oil. So we're not talking about much of a bar here in terms of making the grade. And that would encompass all extra virgin. So it actually describes, if you want to, the life of the oil, and at the end of that time, by the time it fails that test, even marginally, it's pretty tired, gone oil. So it's not like we're saying, everything has to be exactly this and a slight variation is a problem. There is a lot of scope within what's being proposed for the marketing order and what now has been adopted in Australia for good oil over about a 2-year period. Now, personally, as a producer, I want my oil consumed within 2 years, I've got to tell you, because if it doesn't, I've got a problem. I haven't sold it yet, or it hasn't been sold in the end. So it's not like this is overly restrictive. this stuff is being used in retail, and it is on that basis that oil starts really good and has a life. And so we're setting quite a, I think, conservative and reasonable kind of bar in terms of a minimum acceptable quality, and that's what we're talking about here.
May I ask if Mr.
Yes,
Engelhardt
yes,
has a...
Senator.
Did you have a thought on that, too?
Yes, I think much of Mr. Bauer's response, I think his logic path is not quite correct in that he is confusing the methodology of implementation with the necessity for changing the problem. So one of the nice aspects of marketing orders is they are drafted by the body that is proposing the marketing order. That would then require USDA approval, but there's much flexibility in terms of how that order is to be implemented at a final level. So I think it's important to not totally forego the marketing order itself based on his assumption of how that methodology is going to be used. So in terms of the standard being enforced is not defined, and I would refute that Mr. Bauer's understanding of that process, and he is using the logic that it will be too arduous to sample every lot. At the same time, using that same logic that method is too arduous to refute the whole marketing order concept. I think it's important to step back and look at the end goal, which is to cause the enforcement of a standard, and one would hope a standard that is updated to reflect some of the modern science. And marketing order is just one of the possible methods to reach that point. And as I stated earlier, my opinion is that it is the best option that we have, and it is legislation that is unique to United States growers of other places in the world. And I think the precedent is there that the U.S. has adopted standards different from other areas of the world that were once production centers for other crops. The pistachio standard comes to mind. The almond standard, the grades of trade used in almonds, are different than the grades of trade that were once used in Spain, which as recently as 15 years ago was a lead production in the world, which we have quite neatly surpassed here in the recent years. Wine grape standards and certifications for grades of trade in the U.S. are much different than those that are used in the EU. So there is a lot of precedent for an emerging industry in America to essentially refine and redefine the standards by which we hold ourselves. And I think, again, the actual exact methodology by which that's carried out can be worked on.
And I think that's a very good close to our hearing and to this panel. I want to thank all of you, both of you, for coming today. And I want to just close by, first of all, thanking everyone, of course, but I want to tell you that the Olive Oil Subcommittee is looking at how we proceed with respect to policy, how we proceed supporting federal efforts, but also what we can do here in the state with respect to supporting and advancing good olive oil production, authenticity issues, quality issues, enforcement. Of course, we've heard a lot about that today, the marketing order, the need to educate the consumer. We need to do that. We have our subcommittee has a very fine advisory committee, and many of the panelists belong to it, but there are some others who are here as well that I want to acknowledge. Alexandra Devereen, Lillian Dixon is also here, Deborah Rogers, and other members, Dan Flynn, of course, Jim Edders, Brendan Flynn, Brady Whitlow, Darrell Cordy, and Mike Bradley have agreed to serve, and we will be working with them as well as consumers, producers, retailers to figure out what the next steps are. We have now public comment. This is a public hearing, so it's a time when I will excuse the panelists. Anyone in the audience who is so moved to address the subcommittee and has anything to say, I would appreciate it. I'm going to put somebody on the spot. Mr. Cordy, I know I didn't ask you to speak. I know you're in the audience, but I thought you might, if so moved, want to speak to the issue of sensory testing that was raised. I think you're uniquely qualified, I believe, in the audience to talk about the value of such, or the reliability of such testing. And I'm glad you're willing to come forward. Welcome. And anyone else, public comment is a time anyone is willing to, who would like to mention anything, come forward, is welcome to do so. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I really don't like talking without a script. However, I found some of the comments today very interesting about tasting, only because of the fact that in the International Olive Oil Council's description of what extra virgin olive oil is, it has to be without a defect. The only way we can determine if the oil has a defect or not is by tasting it, because so far we have very limited use of a tasting machine, and that's why the International Olive Oil Council is also the people who guarantee the technical ability of a taste panel, because they're the ones who set the rules, they're the ones who do the testing, and if the panel doesn't match the test, well, the panel is disqualified. So this is a very important part of oil production, because the oil science part, as we've seen today in most of the testimony, you can actually change some of the chemistry very easily. What you can't do is change the way it tastes. And since I'm the chairman of the Los Angeles competition, I tend to hire as tasters that are the major tasters in their respective countries. So we have Spanish experts, Italian experts, Australian experts, New Zealand experts. Because originally my idea was to actually get them to taste California oil so that we would improve the breed. Well, what that's done is it's actually given us the opportunity to see different kinds of tasting. And this year the Los Angeles competition is divided into two hemispheres, Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere. People from the Southern Hemisphere will taste oil from the Northern Hemisphere and vice versa. But the quality of the taster is what's very important, because you have to have a taster who is competent. A machine cannot do it yet. I mean, once they've become practiced at doing this, they may in fact invent a machine that can tell you right away whether an oil is rancid. You then would eliminate tasting the oil, because if the machine says it's rancid, why taste it? It saves a lot of bad tastes in your mouth when you taste oil.
I was going to ask you how likely it is to find a machine that's going to be able to do that.
They already have the prototype for it.
I do. All right.
But it does only rancidity. And since that's the major problem, there are other analogous problems that you can discover by tasting, but these machines cost money. Doing the tests cost money. And, unless there's a monetary resolution to the whole thing, no one likes to spend money uselessly.
I want to thank you for letting me put you on the spot. I appreciate that. Public testimony, come forward. Please identify yourself and have a seat at the mic. Yes.
Yes, my name is Dennis Burrison, and I'm a table olive grower.
Welcome.
And I basically came to find out what was going on here, and I found that we could have had this meeting, and we have very similar situations and problems. We came from our industry is basically a $100 million farm gate with about 1,400 growers, about 28,000 acres, the same as what you've heard from the olive oil people. Unfortunately, we're coming from 40 down to 28. And I was back in Washington, D.C., and testified before the ITC back in the early 2000s about the subsidies that you've heard expressed here today. And at that time, they were about $2 billion, and today they're probably close to double that. And we're affected by the same kinds of problems, the flavor standards. I heard Adam talking about AD, and we're governed by the same thing. We are marketing order. In fact, I'm the vice chairman of the California Olive Committee and the chairman of the research committee, part of that federal marketing order. The key to that, in my opinion, is going to be to make sure that the standard we're governed by is reasonably good flavor. My gosh, that's a slippery slope, and we're working very close with UC Davis to try to get a better definition of that. So I think that I'm here to basically say that certainly support and we're certainly empathetic to what the olive oil industry is doing. I'm from Orland, California specifically. The synergies that we find between the two industries are becoming more and more each day. So,
thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Any other public testimony? Please come forward. No? I think I saw you before.
Yes, you did, Senator.
You don't get much time.
I won't. I just wanted to clarify one thing that I think is important. The UC Davis study was a very disciplined, rigorous study by a very well-established institution. And they applied the IOC standard to the oils that they tested, which included the taste panel, an IOC certified taste panel. So I just want to clarify, Mr. Bauer is trying to discredit that test, saying that it was based on chemistry that is not recognized by the IOC. Well, that's fine. Those tests weren't recognized by the IOC, but the taste panel test is and was conducted by an IOC certified panel. And the 73% of the supermarket oils failed the taste panel. And as Mr. Cordy just clarified, taste panels are very rigorous institutions. So I just wanted to make sure we understand, and I'm standing behind the rigors of the UC Davis test.
Indeed.
All right?
Thank you. Mr. Whitlow. Further public comment? Come forward.
Hello, I'm John Fatal. Julia grows olive oil in Dixon, California.
Welcome.
The people that you heard speak today are the big growers. I'm an artisan grower. The problem that I face is amplified. So, when you're talking to these people who can fight the business with the economies of scales, I appreciate that. They're doing me a great favor and helpful. But as a small family farm, I'm beat by that economies of scales, and it's even hampered more when I'm trying to fight these adulterated products that are coming into our country. So, anything that you could do to help the industry, help me as a grower, would be wonderful. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. We have artisan producers on our olive oil advisory committee for precisely that reason. These are issues that affect everyone, and we look forward to working with everyone to come forward with our next proposals. So, any other public comment? Just come forward. Welcome. Thank you.
I represent the consumer, and I wondered if there's a clarification on the Buy America list. Over the week, there seems to be some confusion whether or not extra virgin olive oil is on the Buy America list. I think it was discussed briefly, and somebody indicated that not only is it not on the Buy America list, but it may have been excluded, and it'd be helpful, I think, to get some clarification of that.
All right, a good point. We'll look into that. Thank you. Further public comment? All right. Well, I would like to thank everyone for coming. Our panelists, I believe, were excellent, and thanks to the public for coming as well, and wish you all good eating with good olive oil. Thanks.